Right, I believe everybody's come in, and I want to say good afternoon and welcome. An absolute pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be able to address you on this really important topic. My name is Ken Annandale, if you hadn't worked that out already, and I am sure that there are many of you that know me, but I'm sure there are a number of you that do not know me. So what I'll do is I'll do an introduction of myself so you can see where we fit into the occupational health and safety training world, and I'll also introduce our company and some of the aspects or the services that we provide. But the main thing for today is to look at this physical agents regulation in some detail. The presentation is going to be almost a matter of some of the things we'll do a deep dive and other things we'll do just superficially. There's an enormous amount of information that we're going to be covering over the next couple of months as we get used to this physical agents regulation, or as people are calling it, the PAR, P-A-R. I thought PAR was a golf term, but it's obviously, in this instance, it's the physical agents regulation. And I'm also aware of the fact that some of you are familiar with the topic, others are not. So I just want to say to all our licensees that have joined us, fantastic, lovely to see you. To all the SIOSH members, thank you so much for joining us today. I think I'm ready to start sharing the screen. And with that, I'm going to get straight into it. I just need to confirm, Penny. Right, you can see the screen. That's fantastic. Okay, so with a name like the PAR, the Physical Agents Regulation, the first time I heard this thing, an agent, I thought, well, that's CIA or FBI or something like that. It's an agent that has a badge and walks around, but it's not the case. It's terminology that I was not familiar with. And if you remember, there was a bit of history to this entire process, that this came out about 3 years ago, and it's been in discussion ever since. So we're going to unpack that. We're going to provide you with our details in a moment so that you can actually make contact with us. And may I suggest something, that you just grab your phone. Where's that slide? Just went a bit quick. Wow. There we go. Grab your phone and take a photograph of that number. That is my work number, 082 499 6911. 082 499 6911. And the reason I'd like you to do that is we've got a ton of stuff that we'd like to share with you. And in particular, we've got a WhatsApp group that is the PAR group. And you'll have the opportunity of meeting with other people who are like-minded, interested in the topic, need more information, and so forth. So we'll send you that link. We have somebody standing by. Natalie is standing by to send you that link, or she's going to drop it into the chat box so that you can go there. We'd like to invite you to join us there, because already it's starting to build up in terms of the information. And what is particularly interesting is that we have a really, really nice mix of skills and competencies in South Africa. Now, as we get to know each other, you'll find out that I have a law enforcement background. So I thought I knew the law. And in fact, certainly there are certain elements of the law that I do know, but I want to caution you right from the outset, especially with this regulation, that health and safety practitioners and health and safety representatives are not legal advisors or occupational hygienists until qualified. I happened to be at an AOSH one year, and I was chatting to a prominent advocate, and I said to him, there's a lot of health and safety people that are running these legal liability courses with no background in law at all. They've probably never been in court. They've never been involved in a criminal prosecutorial process. They probably have never, in my instance, arrested many, many, many people over the years. And he was shocked to hear that. And he said, we need to be very careful. We are not legal advisors. We don't fall into that spectrum of the professionals who have a BA-LLB or anything like that. We're just educators. That's really what we are. So with that in mind, I just want to quickly say this, that I regard myself as a novice when it comes to the law. Not a specialist, not a graduate. I am a novice. I enjoy the law a lot. In fact, that's how come I happen to be involved with this webinar. So with that in mind, I was really privileged when I heard that SIOSH was running a webinar. It was hosted by SIOSH, and the two speakers were Garth Hunter, who is an occupational hygienist, and Dr. Greg Q. And I watched that presentation twice and was almost overwhelmed with the detail and the technical stuff and the scientific stuff. And I thought, wow, in all my days in health and safety, I didn't know this stuff. But there's something that I'm very conscious of. I'm conscious of the fact that when I started in the health and safety game, we spoke safety, 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 safety. And I'll give you a little history on that. And it was all safety. Everything was safety. Nobody ever spoke about health. But I then discovered that there is a major problem internationally. The International Labour Organization says about 2.2 million people die as a result of occupational diseases every year. And those are the reported ones. Now, compared that to the people who die as a result of accidents and injuries, it's considerably less. And yet we have safety officers, we have safety committees, we have safety representatives, we have safety files, and the focus is kind of like in the wrong place. And I'm going to suggest that we need to start looking at it and saying, hang on, it's time for us to refocus this. So with that in mind, you do realize, of course, that occupational injuries are different to occupational diseases. You can see the injuries, blood and guts and gore and bodies and amputated parts and things like that. Sounds horrible, but there we go. That you can see, and you apply first aid to it. But what about the people that are slowly but surely getting diseases? And over the next 15, 20, 30 years, they contract these diseases, and then in their retirement, in their golden years, they lie up in bed and are useless, can't work, no good to their family, and so forth. Now, we all know, as a result of our exposure, is that we have these big brag boards outside factories or workplaces. And these brag boards tell us how many injuries, how many days, lost time injuries, and things like that. But have you ever seen an international board that says, and this is the one that I would imagine the guys from ILO, International Labour Organization, should have. And that was a shocker. It really was a shocker. Okay, so having said that, I'll tell you what my journey has been and is. I started off working life as a policeman. I was in the drug squad. I spent 5 years there and got to know the legislation fairly well. Spent a year in police college, and we had some excellent instructors who taught me a whole bunch of things, and I'll share some of these with you as well. After serving in the police force in the SAP, I joined the military police in the Navy, and I was there for another 3 or 4 years, and then joined the Marines when they started the Marines, and I became an officer in the Marines. And after a while, I decided, well, okay, time out. I need to earn some money now. So I joined a national key point, and I was their security manager, as many ex-naval military police and so forth do. And while I was there, the safety officer resigned, and he went back to his former employer. And my boss said to me, Ken, would you take over the safety portfolio? And I went, yeah. Because I really wasn't clear on what the safety thing was. For me, it was security. And there's a confusion. You'll hear of people saying the Minister of Safety and Security. And I go, no, not too sure if that's the right terminology, or maybe I'm just reading it wrong. In any case, what he did was this. His name was Jeff, and he said, okay, to train you, I'm going to send you to NOSA. And I tootled across to NOSA in the Western Cape, and I spent, I never came back. I resigned my job and worked for NOSA for 5 years. So 5 years in the police force, 5 years in the Naval Police and the Marines, and then another 5 years at NOSA. And then I decided to start my own training business. It was called Intra-Train. And we did Cape Town, Durban, Joburg, PE, places like that. We grew. We had about 20 staff members and freelancers that worked with us, and it grew and grew and grew and grew. Now, I'm telling you this story for a good reason. After a while, I found myself almost burnt out, because those days were analog, and my device was an Olivetti typewriter. But having said that, I then grew quite a nice business. And Penny and I were across in the States for a while, and we thought to ourselves, why don't we help people set up their own health and safety training businesses? We'll guide them, we'll coach them, we'll mentor them, we'll equip them and things like that. And that's where IntraSafe came into being. So I've had the opportunity of watching the legislation all along. So currently we know that we've got the Occupational Health and Safety Act. It's 33 years old. That's quite old. And we've just recently received in 2024 the Physical Agents Regulation. So if you look at this process, back in 1918, we had the Factories Act. That was the First World War. Then we had the Second World War, and they developed the Factories, Machinery and Building Work Act. And then in 1983, we saw the arrival of the MOS Act, the Machinery and Occupational Safety Act. Now, please note, only in 1983 did they start speaking about safety. And then for the next 10 years, we had a situation where nothing really transpired until such time as the Occupational Health and Safety Act in 1993. And since we've seen a number of new regulations being added to the entire process. I'm sure you're familiar with most of those regulations, and I'm sure as a professional occupational health and safety person, you would have read through all of them or attended workshops, or at least given it a go to find out if this information was relevant and you could handle it, if it's relevant to your organization and so forth. So you'll notice as well that a lot of these regulations are occupational health and hygiene related regulations. And now the latest one, of course, is the PAR. And that's where we decided to put a workshop together, which we ran very successfully the other day, where we unpacked all of this in a 5-hour period. You may want to attend the next one. And if you do, we'll obviously provide you with information. But the question was, I don't actually know anything about occupational health. And if somebody had said to me, but Ken, what is occupational hygiene? I go, I had an idea of dusts and gases and mists and vapors and fumes and things of that nature. I was conscious of that, but I didn't understand it as a science. And it is a science. And there's no question about it. Occupational health and hygiene is a science. And it's a language that you're going to have to learn to speak. And it is full of acronyms. And that comes up in our training program called the PAR track. We deal with these, but the language is a really weird one. How many of these acronyms do you know and recognize? I was chatting to Penny, my wife and business partner, today, and I was saying, I recognize a couple of them. I recognize AL, action level, and centigrade, degree centigrade. And then I saw SANAS, I know and recognize that, and OEL and PPM. That's about it. That's a WBGT, with bulb globe temperature. So as such, I didn't know this stuff, honestly. And I've been running a health and safety training advisory process. Advisory is not the right word, but mentoring process with our licensing system for years. And it's only now, and I'm admitting it, Idul Akbar, ek is jammer. I didn't follow this closely. I did all the typical safety things. So what are these things? And I'm going to just touch on two, and we unpack them in the workshop. And the first thing that we talk about is action level, AL, and occupational exposure limit. And the first time that I heard them, well, or more recently, I was, what about that? Now, we have a colleague, one of our licensees, a man by the name of Manny De Silva, and he gave me a little bit of information, which is very useful. Then I likened it to my days in the police force. And it was almost a matter of saying, right, let's just talk about an action level. Driving down the road, it's a 120 kilometer speed limit, and I'm now getting to 110 kilometers. And Penny, my wife, sitting next to me, she goes, hey, you're going a bit fast now. Slow down, take it easy. And that's and then I hit the 120, and she goes, you're going to get into trouble. You will get another fine. And I go, and then minutes later, I hear the siren. Beep up, beep up, beep up, pull over. You've broken the speed limit. Now, that's exactly the way I'm reading the action level and the exposure limit. And I'm sure you understand that. 110, caution. 120, stay where you are, not 1 kilometer faster. 125, stop what you're doing. And if you know my wife, and you will meet her, I'm sure, at some other stage, she can be quite forceful. I often joke about it. As much as I love her, she's my boss. So there we go. All right. Having said that, it's a matter of now getting to know the terminology. And the terminology is a language on its own. So in our workshop and in our observer manual or guide, we lay out the acronyms, explain what they are, and then, of course, we explain the terminology and the glossary. So with that in mind, we now go, okay, starting to understand this language. Now, Ndifunda isiXhosa, which means I'm learning to speak isiXhosa. I don't know isiXhosa. I can say the common things, hello, goodbye, and upi nyama, where's the meat? And upi puza, where's the beer? Now, those are important things so that I can communicate. Now, imagine this. You're going to go into a boardroom. You're going to be talking about the PAR. The employer is going to ask you questions, or maybe your client is going to ask you questions about certain things. And if you don't know the language, for me, it would be egg on my face. One of the things that I learned at police college was from an excellent old sergeant. And he said something to me which was profound. And now that was I'll tell you when it was, 1972. He said to me, you don't have to know the law in detail. Nobody knows the law in detail. He said to me, or said to us, the class, the platoon, he said, you need to know where to find the law when you need it. And every single police station that I served in would have a shelf full of law books, criminal procedure, and all the other laws that be applicable. And that made me realize all I need to do to understand this stuff is I need to read it. I need to get hold of it and read it. Now, here's a really cool thing. Given the fact that we now have digital devices, which are quite different to my Olivetti typewriter, is you can use your digital device to read the law for you, whether it's text to voice, whether it is actually doing a search in the legislation. It's absolutely brilliant. If you're not using your digital device, do use it. I have almost every single piece of relevant legislation as a PDF file, and I've got it on my laptop. And if I need to find something, it's a matter of just find it, search it, read it. And for instance, I was looking at the ergonomics regulation the other day, and I went, how many times does the ergonomics regulation talk about training? Well, that's a little exercise that you can do. Open the PDF file, do a search, Control F, have a look and see how many times. I can tell you now, about 24 times. 24 times the word train comes up. Now, it's not indirect references, you must train, but there are references to train and training. We often get people asking us questions about QCTO and SACWA, CETA, NQF, all of those sorts of things. I almost never get people saying, what does the law say about training? Because remember, first and foremost, the law is the law. And everything stands or falls on the law. Okay, so I'm going to suggest something. If you look at the functions of a health and safety representative, and I'm sure you're all familiar with it, there are people advertising jobs as health and safety representatives. We see people claiming to be a qualified health and safety rep. They did a 2-day course, and now they're a qualified health and safety rep. We actually see people talking about she reps, and I go, where do they get that from? That's strange. That's not in the law. But be that as it may, call it whatever you want. And then you start looking at the legislation and questioning it, and feel free to question the law. So I'm going to read it. In fact, you read it with me. An employer shall provide. Does it say should provide, can provide, may provide? It says shall. He or she will. He or she must. So you look at that word and you go, okay, it is obligatory. Then it carries on, says that the employer must provide the facilities, assistance, and training. You go, okay. Now, for me, I would ask the question, what do you mean facilities? What do you mean assistance? And what do you mean training? What do you mean training? Training 1 day, 2 day, 3 day? Low credit, high credit? QCTO skills program? What do you mean training? Define it. And the legal professional, and in our instance, the Department of Employment and Labor, they don't define it. Then it carries on and says, as a health and safety representative may require. And I go, okay, health and safety rep. You can call them an OSH rep if you want to. I'm not too sure if you should be calling them a she rep anymore, by the way. And you'll see that emerging as we go along. And it says, may reasonably require. Then it says, as have been agreed upon. Okay. So now here's a challenge. And it's Ken's challenge to you. Whenever you have somebody come and run a health and safety rep training for your people, do you sit down with your committee, unpack the curriculum, the methodology, the content, the qualification or competency or experience and skills of the trainer? Or do you hire in the cheapest guy? One size fits all. I used to do that. It was before the Occupational Health and Safety Act. But on Monday, I was at Pick and Pay, and I'd run the same course that I'd run on Tuesday at Premier Milling. And then on Wednesday, I'd run exactly the same course at PPC. And on Thursday, I'd run the same course at some other place. Same course, no adjustment, no modification, no discussion. I wouldn't go into a client's offices and sit with the human resources people and say, let's discuss and agree upon. And agreement must be in writing. I hereby, and that's the way I think. You can obviously chat to your legal advisor about that. But That, to me, is what agreement is all about. And it has to be with the committee. We'll come back to the committee shortly. And with that in mind, I then think, okay, cool. The training that I'm going to provide is agreed upon internally, not externally. And that's Ken. If I was an attorney or a prosecutor, that's exactly what I'd be doing. Okay, now let's move on. Talk about these health and safety representatives. And clearly, when the training takes place, in some instances, it isn't a matter of people know what their functions, duties, and responsibilities are. Because often I come across documents that say health and safety representatives' duties. I go, there's no such thing. Health and safety reps do not have duties. They have functions and responsibilities, yes, as employees, but they don't have duties. And that's a little bit of smoked something, and now we're getting excited about it. So here's something that I realized as well. Tibor, the former chief inspector, said something. He said, if it's not in the law, don't you write it into the law. Okay, so with that, we then see that the health and safety representatives and the committee must consult with the employer. And that consultation must be done in good faith. And I spoke at, or I chaired one of the SARS conferences down in Cape Town about 2 or 3 years ago. And I asked the audience, I said to them, how many of you have attended a labor relations workshop? And, of the 500-600 people that were there, I'm not sure how many people were there, but of those people, guess what? No more than 10 or 12. So in other words, we as the health and safety people have disconnected ourselves with the Labor Relations Act. Many of us don't know anything about arbitration or negotiation or consultation and so forth, because it's clearly in the legislation. And it is in the PAR. Now, of course, we cover these in the workshop, and I'd love to have you with us. Obviously, there's a little fee involved, but have you with us so we can unpack it and start the journey. I call this scratching the surface. Now, together with the PAR, we also got the explanatory documents. And the explanatory documents are really interesting. Very, very, very interesting. Now, bearing in mind, 2 documents, say it comes out in the same government gazette. But if you look at the back, you'll see explanatory documents. And when you read it, what I do is, of course, I print it as well. And then I highlight certain and go, wow, that's interesting. We'll touch on some of them. And these are the things that we cover in the workshop. But we'll go to the question of what is this agent? I spoke about CIA or FBI. No. And I personally found out that an agent is a source of energy or exposure. And once you understand that, you go, okay, this is something that may harm me or harm the workers. I then unpack the table of contents of that regulation. And we've got 22 regulations over there. And you'll see the ones highlighted in red. Those are the agents. Cold and heat and illumination and indoor air quality and vibration and occupational non-ionizing radiation. So we know about these things, and we obviously, as health and safety practitioners, we would then address them to a greater or lesser degree, but not in the detail that the PAR is now requiring. Then I took it one step further. I then looked at every sub-regulation. There's over 300 sub-regulations in the PAR. And I put it together as a checklist. And on the workshop, you'll get a copy of this checklist, and you can then do your own internal, should we call it an audit or check? And you can go through every single one with your committee and go, does this apply? Does this apply? And remember, this is criminal legislation. Do we have the evidence to show that we've done it? So I was sitting on the veranda the other day, and I got a phone call from one of our licensees. Now, licensees are like these franchisees. Okay. So the franchisee or licensee, she phoned me and she said, she did an ergonomics risk assessment. The inspector came around and said, you are not allowed to do that. And she was like, really? Why not? He said, because you're not competent. She said, yeah, but I did a course. I did a SAC Receiver NQF QCTO credit bearing course. And I got a certificate of competency. And the truth of the matter is that's worth absolutely nothing when it comes to prosecution. Nothing, nada, nix, boggerel. So I used to think I'm competent. Well, nah, I think the right term is I'm a novice with a passion for the subject. Okay, so there we go. I've spoken about the workshop. Now, why do we want to do this? We want to keep people out of hospital and out of jail. We got a phone call the other day. In fact, they sent us this document. The client sent us this document. They're in the retail industry. An inspector came knocking at the door and said, have you performed an ergonomic risk assessment in your shop, in your store? And the manager would, I don't even know what you're talking about. In any case, the inspector provided them with a contravention notice and I think 60 days to rectify things. And they phoned us and they said, what do we do? Where do we find a competent person to do this? Well, we'll talk about that. So the employer has a huge responsibility, and you and I are sometimes just a barrier between prosecution and, of course, compliance. And the employer has a whole bunch of things that he must do according to this piece of legislation. I'm not going to break them down now, but it's a simple process. So let's just quickly have a look at what this competent person is. You'll recognize that in the front of the Act, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and or the regulations, they define competency. And here's an interesting thing. The older regulations have one version. The newer regulations have another version. The draft construction regulations have yet another version. And now the PAR has yet another version. And you and I are supposed to know these things, and we're the ones that are supposed to be educating and assisting and guiding. So important that we get to know it. But when you look at that legislation, it looks like pure legalese, doesn't it? It's word upon word upon word upon word. And you'll notice the words in red, there's a little bit of a trend and a pattern that you see in that definition of competency. And it's qualifications. Do you have a qualification? Now, some of you may or may not know this. While I was at NOSA, I became an audiometrist. I went off to Pentec, which is now CPUT, and I studied audiometry, and I became a registered audiometrist, which is occupational hearing loss. And that qualification as such would not suffice anymore. Why? Because at the end of the definition, look at the very last sentence there. It says the person who's familiar with the Act and applicable regulations made under the Act. So it's the person must be knowledgeable, trained, experienced, qualified, and knowledgeable about or familiar with the Act and the applicable regulations. So that's the definition. Now, I like writing. In fact, I've written countless training materials and things like that. But what I discovered was this. Word for Windows has a search and replace facility, and you may want to apply this. I did this. I would take the paragraph, I would pop it into Word for Windows, and I would then replace any and all punctuation with a bullet point. So I'd go from that to this. And you can read it. It's almost like, whoa, the light is shining on it. Now I understand what this is, or have a better understanding of what it is. Now you'll notice there they talk about the National Qualifications Framework Act. And in particular, I'm going to read that sentence there. It says, relevant qualifications specific to or including the physical agent, provided that where appropriate qualifications and training are registered in terms of the provisions of the National Qualification Framework, that qualificational framework, that training must be regarded as the standard. Then, to get my head around this, what I did was this. I actually wrote an article. I shared the article. I love sharing the articles, and I love getting feedback. And if you want a copy of the article, you can just WhatsApp that number, and we'll send it to you, and you can have a look at it. And here's my invitation. Please crit it. I do not know everything. I know something. I know some stuff about some things. Other things I know a fair amount, but just come and tell me, I think you got this wrong. To qualify or to clarify this, I made contact with somebody he said, please don't mention my name, which is fine. And I said to him, what is your understanding of competency? And he agreed with what I'd written there. So, but hang on. Remember, again, my mantra is I'm not a lawyer. And I hope that you're going to adopt exactly the same mantra. We are novices unless we have a qualification. Okay, now you know all about SAQA, CETA, NQF, and you know that the structure works like this. Now training is dealt with by the Department of Higher Education. Underneath them, they have SAQA. Then we have CETAs and we have QCTO. I'm sure you've been following that transition. And it's part of what we do is we educate and assist and guide people in that entire process. Now, it's important to know that SAQA wrote unit standards, And then Department of Higher Education and Training said, right, we're going to scrap those unit standards and we're going to now introduce the QCTO and shift most of the responsibility for unit standard writing, or now they call it curriculum writing, to the QCTO. All right, I'm sure you've been following that entire saga, and it is something of a saga, and it's been chaotic. So much so that I feel it's almost like the Soccer World Cup, where a player on the field just kicks the ball backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. And we, the audience, get excited, then we don't get excited. And then it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And when I was in the military, we used to have a thing called hurry up and wait. And that hurry up and wait was literally, you could wait for months, or in this instance with the QCTO, as much as we love and respect them, you are waiting for years. It's running into years now. So with that in mind, what do? Well, here's the bottom line. The law is the law is the law. If the law says do the training, that is called legal compliance training, do the training. If you happen to stand in court, heaven forbid, you can at least say to the magistrate, Edel Akhbar, I did this. I did what a reasonable man could do, because there are no unit standards or there are no QCTO curriculum anymore on that topic. Sometimes it's never even been written. Okay, so that's another conversation. Now, in Regulation 3 and Section 8, we see exactly the same words: information, instruction, training, and supervision coming up. Sure, you're familiar with that. So I ask the question, what is information? What amounts to information? What is instruction? And what is training again? Interesting, looking at the Act and the definition there of information, instruction, training, that's in Section 8. It says instructions, plural, not just one instruction. But this part talks of instruction. So their thinking must be different. What is that? Go and do your homework and see what we could find and find out what do they mean by information, instruction, singular, and training. So if we look at Section 8, it says the following. And I like to think of this as literally the foundation of all occupational health and safety training in South Africa. Firstly, it says, Meneer, the employer, or Madam, the employer, must establish the hazards. And you know that those words are defined: danger, hazard, and risk. We see them in the Act itself. He or she must establish the hazards. And nowadays we call it a HIRA, hazard identification and risk assessment. Then, once you know what your hazards are, the very next thing that you've got to do is you've got to write precautionary measures. What does that mean? Safe work procedures, or whatever you want to call them. And there are so many different terms for it. Doesn't matter what you call it, you've got to have them. And you've got to write them, and you've got to record them. You've got to have them as evidence standing by if somebody asks, an inspector asks, where is it you got it? So now we've got the precautionary measures. What do we do with them? Well, we then sit down with the training department or the person that's going to be developing the training material, and we will write the precautionary measures into the information, instruction, and training. Does that make sense? You write what you've discovered, your risk profile, into the training. And then you look at the supervisor and you go, okay, Meneer Supervisor, you need to know this stuff as well. Now, if we just jump from Section 8 to Section 13, you'll see that the employees must be made conversant with the precautions. Those precautionary measures is something that the employee must know. Okay, so here's an interesting thing. I was asking the question, what do you mean by conversant? Well, I said to you, Ndifunda isiXhosa. I speak a little bit of isiXhosa. And currently I'm learning to speak a bit of French. And it's going very slowly. Penny's way more diligent than I am. But I can't claim to be conversant in French or isiXhosa. Ek kan, my Afrikaans is nie sleg nie, ek kan Afrikaans praat en ek dink ek kan converse. Now, with that in mind, bear that in mind, that's the level. When the learner walks out, or the employee walks out of the training session or the information session or the instruction session, he or she must be able to say to their neighbor, the neighbor says, waar was jy vandag? And he says, I was in a training session and this is what they told me. They can converse in it. That's the level, the standard. Okay, so now you see the framework. And then it says, good, now we've got that. Let's talk about the supervisor. Because directly after that, Section 8, it says that in 8.2, the supervisor must be trained, or the employer must have the supervisor trained. And we hear a lot about train the health and safety reps, train the health and safety rep, train the health and safety reps. I don't hear too much about train the supervisor. And that should be. Now, we developed some training material. We've got a whole bunch of legal compliance training programs on our website that you can acquire. But it's really important. Planning, organizing, leading, controlling, motivating, and all of those sorts of things are part of the supervisory function, right down to discipline. Have you ever heard anybody say, we're not here to find fault. We're here to find the facts. And the Afrikaans have a nice word. I hope I don't offend anybody by using this word. Snert. Rubbish. How dare you say that? It's criminal legislation that has been written for the prosecution of individuals. And you go, we're not here to find fault. Of course we are. Now, I can say that very easily because I used to be a policeman. I have no problem saying to a person, you've broken the law, my friend. Don't break the law. Okay, so having said that, I hope it hasn't offended anybody. Let's have a look at what we're going to do with the PAR. Now, to start off, I just want to say this. As you look at the explanatory document, you will see in the explanatory document that it says that the employees must be made familiar, conversant, or whatever it is, comprehensively so. But who can do that? Do you know that according to the regulation and the explanatory document, only competent people may run those training sessions? So if you're going to run a PAR training session, you need to be competent in those agents. How about that? And I don't know of too many people that are competent in all the areas. So what we have decided to do, and we're going to introduce this as a intra bit of terminology, a PAR awareness workshop. And the PAR awareness workshop is literally a matter of saying, great, we need to create an awareness. And that is completely within the law. And you as a health and safety practitioner, you as a professional in another area, you can do that. You're allowed to. Okay. So we then have workshop leaders who we suggest should be quite familiar with the Act and the regulation. And then we have competent people who can come along and run training programs. Now, I've been Googling for the past probably 2 months while I've been working on this project. It's interesting to see there are very few, if any, places that you can go commercially to hire a trainer that'll come and run a PAR workshop. It's almost like it hasn't caught on yet. It's almost like the old ergonomics regulation. Came out in 2019, around about the same time as COVID. It took 6 years for people to start going, oh, well, I think we should run ergonomics training. And with that in mind, we have an ergonomics course, by the way. Okay, so now I'm saying PAR awareness workshops, anybody that is knowledgeable can do that. PAR training, competent people, competent people, competent people. And I want to just quickly touch on this, that the development of the training material is also critical. I use AI a lot. I make no apologies for it. AI is a great friend. But wow, you can get it wrong. And I get it wrong a lot. And if it wasn't for my background, I wouldn't know that I got it wrong or that AI got it wrong. So bear that in mind. Okay, so let's just go back. I want to say to you that in the explanatory document, it says a very interesting thing. It says, in order to participate in the workplace consultations, health and safety representatives and health and safety committee members, as employees, must, I'm going to use that word, must receive training in relation to the identified physical agents. So let me just say this. If there's a possibility of having a PAR on your premises or your client's premises, all of those people, the Health and Safety Committee and Health and Safety representatives, must receive training in physical agents regulation, information, instruction, and obviously insights. Now, the explanatory document is not law. It is a guidance. Then, of course, we also see in the regulation that they talk extensively of refresher. They talk about, oopsie, just a bit far there, fast, forgive me. Let's go back. Okay, there's the refresher. They talk about you must train your contractors. or as you probably know, the correct term is the mandatories. Somebody said to me the other day, and it was a valid question. What do you mean mandatory? Doesn't that mean compulsory? And I said, no, that's mandatory. This is mandatory. And if you look in the suburbs, you will see there's estate agent boards, and it says, so-and-so, this is the estate agent, sole mandate. In other words, they got the contract to do it. Now, you as a training provider, let me say this, you as a training provider may, as an independent training provider, may be running a training program on a client's premises. And I know amongst our delegates today, and welcome, we've got a number of people that represent corporates or enterprise establishments. Now, as a training provider, the client must train you. You go, but I'm supposed to train the client. Figure that one out. The client must train you. So having said that, what level? Well, again, they come up with this very interesting word in Regulation 3. It says comprehensively. Remember we used the word conversant? Now they're using the word comprehensively. Phew. And what must I be trained in? The purpose, what they are, which ones are present, what the risks are and the possible effects. In our workshop, we talk about the COIDA, the Compensation of Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act, and we talk about Schedule 3, where they've listed a lot of the occupational diseases that you're going to be looking at in future. Okay, so having said that, now, the next thing that's a bit fast. The next thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to identify, and I say we, because this is anybody and everybody within the workplace, identify what the agents are, the risk assessment. Now, remember, formerly we used to speak of HIRA, Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment. Now they speak of ERA, ERA, Exposure Risk Assessment. And somebody needs to do it, and I'll tell you why. So you need to go into the workplace, or maybe a health and safety representative, or maybe a supervisor, or charge hand, or foreman, or somebody like that, go into the workplace and do an assessment. Now, this is not the formal scientific assessment. This is, do we have a problem? Because if we have a problem, then what we need to do is we need to call in the competent person. Are you following me on that? We have a problem? Okay, well, we better get a competent person to come and do the measurements. Because remember, that competent person is the scientist who has the degree and the equipment and the qualification and things like that. Now, to assist with the assessment, the regulation has tables. And these talk about minimums and maximums. Remember, we were speaking about action levels and OELs and things like that. That's all in the regulation. And already on page 37, and I spent a lot of time just going through it, looking at it, seeing if I could understand it. More importantly, could I explain it? And in the workshop, we do that. We break it down. So then from there, we go, right, there must be a report. Otherwise, what are you going to do? Well, you're just going to sit at the committee meeting and just talk about these things? The answer is no. We're going to have to put it in writing. So I created a form which you could use provisionally, preliminarily. And then, of course, we'd have this risk checklist. We'd go through it and say, have we covered everything? And remember, this is like the novices. These are not the professionals. And I'm sure we have a couple of occupational hygienists that's sitting here and they're going, yes. In fact, Penny said something today. She said, the occupational hygienist must be going, hallelujah. There's going to be work for us for the next 100 years. There will be. Because it's not the kind of thing that we as safety practitioners are ready and equipped to do. They brought this out 3 years ago. And it occurred to me late one night, I thought, goodness gracious me, when that draft regulation came out for discussion, we should have seen this influx of people going to university to get the qualification, because now they would not be without work. And by the way, AI is not going to replace an occupational hygienist. Not in our lifetime or the next. So having said that. So what qualification should we have? Let's go back. Gosh, very sensitive. I've got a new mouse. Okay. The regulation speaks of these stresses or agents, but not those. Interesting, hey? And the reason for that is that they have brought out other regulations like the chemical agents regulation, the biological agents regulation, the noise abatement and noise, it was the noise-induced hearing loss regulation, and now the new one that's coming out, the noise exposure regulation. So they're not covered in the PAR. The ergonomics regulation, I already mentioned, have come out and been out for a while. But I'm going to suggest that you go back to that regulation with some of the insights that you got from today. Have a look at it, pull it apart, ask questions. Literally, and I'm saying pull it apart, do that exact thing. Then you, as a practitioner, can go out there and you can do a preliminary, and the professional will do the scientific. Does that make sense? I trust it does. So with that in mind, as now I'm going to call you a PAR observer. As a PAR observer, you could be anybody that has interest and knowledge about what's going on within that workplace. An engineer, a maintenance person, a human resources person. It could be somebody that is maybe even your health and safety practitioner, who we know as a safety officer. They could do it as well. But something that you do need to know is a PAR observer, it's not a legal appointment. It's a logical appointment. It's best practice. And then you, as an individual, declare your qualification. I declared my qualification as I used to be an audiometrist. I'm not an audiometrist anymore, therefore I'm not competent in that area. So with that in mind, let's have a look at the competent person again. Remember we had a look at the definition. And there are 4 words that come up there: knowledge, training, experience, and qualifications. So this competent person can either be an employee or a mandatory. And Penny and I were chatting to a corporate client this week, and they've got their own in-house competent people, in-house occupational hygienists. In fact, I mentioned Garth Hunter and Dr. Greg Q. Garth Hunter is an occupational hygienist, and he used to be with one of the refineries. So the company or the organization has their own professional, or they then source somebody. Now, if you're going to be sourcing people and appointing them, remember there's going to be SLAs, there's going to be job descriptions, there's going to be MOUs or whatever. You need to get all of those in place, because you're going to have to keep this evidence for up to 40 years. I'll give you a quick example. So where do you find these people? Well, first and foremost, I'd go to SCIO. SCIO is a sister organization to SCIOSH. And obviously, it's the South African Institute of Occupational Hygiene. And there's a website, and you can go onto the website and you can chat to the various people. And that means that you can get somebody who's already qualified on their books. Now, if you look down that list there, you'll see just above not competent unless qualified, you'll see approved inspection authority. So on the left-hand side, 2 of our licensees are already approved inspection authorities. Question is, how do you become an inspection authority? We'll explain that in detail when we get onto the workshop. So clearly, you can become an inspection authority, but most importantly, you can become somebody that is recognized as a competent person. You've got the appropriate qualification, and the qualification would relate directly to the agent or the stressor, then you could become. But I made a note of something that in conversation, and I've been talking to lots of people trying to get his best insight into it. The information, unfortunately, isn't all that forthcoming. I spoke to a young man who's an attorney, and I said, "Are you familiar with the PAR?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "What I've done about 100 risk assessments, physical agent risk assessments. And I hate to say this, but I think he got it wrong. He's not qualified in noise, lighting, radiation, ventilation, non-ionizing radiation, vibration. He's an attorney. He has a bachelor's degree, a BA, and then he has an LLB or a master's or whatever the qualification is that made him an attorney. He's not a competent person. Now, I hope he's here, and I will gladly engage with him on that topic. But that's the reality of it. Okay, so where do I go to become a competent person? Well, you can get an academic qualification. And there is a university, that Northwest University, that is one of our licensees, and they run the course. It's a 3 or 4 year course. I'm not exactly sure how long. I'm just 4 years. A 4 years professional qualification. And if we had started with this 3 years ago, you'd be in the pound seats in 1 year from now. So bear that in mind. That is something you may want to study. Now, I often hear people going to do this course, that course, the next course. And I'm thinking, in fact, something that I did do, and you may want to play this game as well, just go online and do a search. Which major courses worldwide actually cover occupational hygiene in some depth? Ask a question, come up with an answer. Okay. Now, as a mandatory or contractor, you need a job description. The company needs a job description. The employer needs a job description. And certainly the human resources department should be involved in writing the job description or the spec. I mentioned something about the AIAs. Now, what happened to them? Where are they? Well, here's an interesting fact. In the PAR, there is zero mention of AIAs. Nothing. Nada. Nix. Variance. Bogoro. What happened to them? Excuse me. It appears to me as if the Department of Employment and Labor have taken their focus off AIAs and focused on the individual competent people. I might be right or wrong, but I think that that's exactly what's happened there. So at this time, what you also need to take into account is that AIAs also need to be accredited by SANAS. All right? And then what I did is I went online and I found the Department of Employment and Labor's AIA directory, manual, whatever you want to call it. And you can download it. There's a link there. If you want the link, one of our team will send it to you, or you can just WhatsApp Penny and say, please send me the link of all the AIAs. And this is dated April. So it's up to date. And there you can have a look at who does what. But what is really interesting is it's limited to just 4 primary activities. Maybe I misread that. 4 primary activities, whereas these are not covered by AIAs at all. So in other words, the Department of Employment and Labor have not received applications for those stressors or agents. And the ones that are in our regulation, not there. Similarly, we see that SAQA, CETA, NQF, QCTO, that whole story, they don't have unit standards or they don't have curricula for these topics. How crazy is that? Okay, right at the bottom, we've got the ergonomics regulation. That came out in 2019, as I mentioned. And in 2019, we would expect that they'd be on the ball and writing unit standards for it. Well, they wrote an ergonomics risk assessor unit standard, which has expired, leaving us what? Where do we go? What do we do? Can we go to an AIA and say, hello, are you a competent person for ergonomics? And are you registered? So once again, I want to encourage you, have a look at what's happening around you, ask the questions, ask the difficult questions, and say, what are we to do? Because there is a way around it. Penny has a nice Afrikaans saying, she says, there's doenbaar. There's a way around it. It's like Rassie Erasmus. We just need 1 point to win. You need the activity, you need the position in place. So if the inspector comes knocking at the door, you can say, here's the evidence. I did do that. Now we go to the next level. And this is where the scientist comes in. This is where the competent person comes in. And the competent person will come with a bucky load of tools and equipment and instruments and things like that, so that he or she can measure what's going on. So remember, there was a preliminary. It was identified by the observer, the PAR observer. Now somebody has reacted, called in the AIA or called in the competent person, and they come and they do I don't know how long it's going to take, a week, to do all the dust and noise and gases and mists and vapors and fumes and things like that. I don't know. Obviously, somebody can give us some information on that. But if it's to be done thoroughly, then that's important. And if you think of places like a refinery, that's not going to be an overnight activity. It's not going to be arrive on Wednesday and leave on Thursday. It's going to be a thorough, or needs to be a thorough thing, because, again, they know, the competent person knows that there is a Section 37 obligation to make sure that they don't mislead the employer. This equipment has to be calibrated. Where are the certificates? Let me see. And that's an important part. Then this risk assessment, we've spoken about it already. You've got documentation, you've got evidence, you've got process. You need to be able to prove something. And I want to show you something in a moment. Okay, then as we start wrapping up, something that is important to note is this, that this regulation talks about medical screening and surveillance. Screening as in, have a look, see if the person's got any problems. Surveillance is, we've identified that they are either healthy or unhealthy, diseased or not diseased, and we will watch them and monitor them as we go. All right. Now, I mentioned that Dr. Greg Q was one of the speakers on the SIOSH conference, or SIOSH webinar the other day. And I believe that he's going to be speaking in Cape Town at the end of this week. So Penny and I will be in Cape Town. If you want to come across and grab a cup of coffee with us and just say hello, it'd be absolutely brilliant. We'll be at the SIOSH conference, and it'd be lovely to meet you, or maybe meet your colleagues and clients. So Dr. Greg, I've known Greg for, 20, 30 years. Knowledgeable, one of South Africa's top occupational medicine practitioners. Now, there's an occupational health practitioner and an occupational medicine practitioner. You need to know the roles of the two, and who and when and where, and all of that's in our workshop that we'll be covering. But here's the case study that I want to share with you. If you remember, just outside Cape Town, there was a power station. It's called the Athlone Power Station, and it had those two big towers. And those towers were eventually imploded when the power station closed down. On one hand, we have Langa. On the other hand, we have Pinelands. So the fumes and dust and dirt and muck and pollution from those towers would land up, depending on the wind, southeaster or northwester, in those people's homes, or factories or businesses, and so forth. Now, Google it, and you'll see to this very day, there are people dying as a result of the work that they did at Cape Town City Council. They worked at the power station. They had a job. They were exposed to these things. There was little or no emphasis because, remember, it was the Factories Act and no safety. And those people are dying as a result of that. So respiratory diseases and asbestosis and. So apparently they took a decision, Cape Town City Council took a decision not to demolish the actual power station because it is full of asbestos, or was. I can't verify that. Okay, so I've now got to the end of my time. I've been, I said to Gareth, I try and be as on time as possible. So, ladies and gentlemen, I trust that this presentation has just stimulated your thinking. For one, it provides us with huge opportunity. You as a practitioner, you as a trainer, you as a competent person, it provides you with wonderful, wonderful opportunity. Like I've got my cell phone, and on my cell phone, I've got probably 2 or 3 attorneys and a couple of doctors and other people that I could call on if and when. In fact, 1 or 2 former chief inspectors on my phone, and I could call on them if I need them. And if I need somebody's assistance, I've got that. But I don't have a single occupational hygienist on my phone. Penny and I were talking about it today. One of our licensees, we've got about 100 licensees operating in Africa. One of the licensees is a competent person, or at least an AIA registered organization. So now the journey starts. Look, read, listen, research, do what is necessary for you as a professional to actually get your head around this topic. Start talking to people and share with them. If you want to acquire the training material, let us know. But I want to end off by saying this is a shift, and I believe it's a fairly significant shift. In terms of the construction regulation, it says that you must have a safety file. But now, if you go on Facebook, every Dick, Tom, and Harry and Tabu, they are now writing safety files. There's software to do safety files. How and where are we going to put occupational health and hygiene into the safety file? We're going to have to change the name. It's no longer a safety file, certainly in terms of construction regulation. And shouldn't be a generic safety file, print on demand. We need to take this seriously. It changes our structure, our systems, our policies, our procedures. It changes these things. And your health and safety program, I trust, will start emerging as a health, safety, hygiene program. And your people will be better protected. So with my time being almost up, I'm 2 minutes over. Just want to quickly say this to you. And Gareth said I can just advertise this as fine. Thank you, Gareth. For those of you that don't know what we do, we're running a presentation on becoming a licensee, and that's going to take place on the 29th. Please join us. It would be an absolute pleasure. It's free. It's online. You can send a WhatsApp message to Penny on that number, and we'll then send you an invitation. And that would be an absolute privilege. Then, if the idea of running your own awareness sessions has appealed to you, and you want to save yourself, and I'm not joking at all, 3-4 weeks worth of research and development, and I mean, it really became quite deep. you can acquire the material. And you attend the workshop. There's 1,795 Rand per person for the workshop or briefing session, and then the training material is 3,900 Rand. And that means you've got material that you can customize, adapt, modify, and make. Remember, we spoke about the precautionary measures and agent specific. So hopefully that's a stimulus to you. Then I want to say to Sayosh, thank you very much, guys. We really, really appreciate it. Penny, myself, and Natalie, and the rest of our team, we say thank you. It's great to be able to use your platform like this. And for those of you that missed my number right in the beginning, there it is again, 082 499 6911. 082 499 6911. Our website is www.intrasafe.co.za. And then at the bottom there, you'll see the WhatsApp chat group, and we'll gladly welcome you on there. It's one of those attend, don't attend. It's no stress, no pressure or anything like that. And it's going to be probably 90% of it is going to be updates and information and new thoughts. And as people feedback to me, I'll feed to the group, and then you can decide what you want to do with it. And with that, I'm about done. I think, I'm on slide 74. So I'm going to hand back at this stage to Gareth. And I just want to say to everybody, it's been a joy and a pleasure. I need to drink something now. My throat is dry because that's a lot of talking. So with that in mind, thank you very much. Over to Gareth.
Hi, Ken. Thank you so much for a very informative webinar. I think Penny has a couple of questions for you that she just would like to read out. Thank you.
Great.
Okay. Question one.
Question one.
Do you always have to assess the same things when you're conducting an occupational hygiene survey if nothing has changed from the previous assessment?
Well, that's an interesting question. I hope everybody heard that. Do you have to assess the same thing with each and every assessment? They require a routine assessment, yes. I think it's every 24 months. Please excuse me if I get that wrong, but it's compulsory that you have to do the same thing over and over and over and over again, because you want to see whether it is diminishing as a risk, and obviously with risk profiles and things like that. So my understanding of it is yes.
Question two. How do you confirm if the Lux reading assessment is a requirement for businesses big and small? Lighting.
Okay. So this is something that I do not know. So the question is, kindly confirm if the Lux reading assessment is applicable to big and small. Well, I know that the legislation talks about employers and self-employed. And so my assessment or assumption would be yes for a business. Penny asked the question about what about a home business? I don't know. It's a question that we could deal with in the WhatsApp group. If you don't mind popping that question in there, I will gladly ask somebody to answer it to you. One of our licensees, Manny De Silva, Manny, you were talking about it the other day, and you seem to have a really good understanding. Okay.
Third and last question. There's a lot on LinkedIn around SHE-REP courses where people say that SHE-REP certificates do not expire.
Okay, so here's the question. There's a lot on LinkedIn that say that SHE-REP course certificates do not expire. Okay. Now, that's a bit of a legal question. I don't fully have an answer. Other than first aid, I don't know of anywhere where it specifies a period of before expiring. I do know for a fact that if it's a QCTO program, QCTO qualifications are like your matric certificate. They don't expire. However, what I would suggest that you do is within the confines of your committee and discuss it and ask them what is the best practice for us. And you can decide whether it is something that's going to expire or not. Now, just think about it this way. Normally, the SHE-REP or health and safety rep would be appointed for 2 or 3 years. And that's completely up to the employer. In that negotiation consultation process that takes place right in the beginning, you'll see that the PAR regulations says constantly go back to the committee, consult with the committee, ask the committee for their opinion. And do you remember there was an element that I spoke about over there, which is quite interesting. So we put the health and safety rep on a 2-3 day course, whatever it might be, whether it's unit standard aligned or not, is not critical because it's not dictated to in the law. You must train them, but now how and who does the training, that's completely up to the organization themselves. But in the explanatory document, it said there that all, well, not my words, remember, I'm not a lawyer, but all health and safety representatives and committee members must be trained in PAR so that they can participate in the consultation process. Remember that? And that's important. So would that have a frequency? Well, go on to the legislation, open up that PDF file, search for it and say renewals. What's the renewal? Say again, refresher. So search for the word refresher and see what it says there. And then once you got it, cut and paste, and then you know for a fact it's in the law, it says the following thing. So I used to be a commercially orientated training provider. So I think I used to say to people, oh, it expires after every 2 years. And then somebody said, prove it. Prove it. How do I prove it? I don't know. I actually don't know. So I would err on the side of saying that's an employer decision or committee decision. Right. I see Anton says the regs apply to every employee. Yes. Includes our home business, I'm sure. Yes. Especially if you employ somebody. Thank you, Anton. Appreciate that. Right. Next question, if there's one that I can handle.
And I think you'll pick up questions in the party.
Right. I can, thank you. I think you can handle quite a bit, quite a lot, Ken. Ken, thank you so much. That is all. There's one more here. Sorry, Penny, there's one more. Then I'll close the Q&A if you want to check that out quickly. I might as well read it out. Okay, Ken, I know this is not according to PAR, so I think I will close the Q&A after this. Michael says, which certification would you recommend for a health and safety representative from which institution, and how important are the NQF levels? Well, I mean, I could answer that, Ken, but I'll let you handle that one, and then I'll close the Q&A.
Gareth, thank you. Good question. Which institution? It's good and bad and otherwise. There are some that are on top of it that haven't renewed their, and others that haven't renewed their training material. The training material seems to be outdated. I was looking at some of the big programs like the, let me not mention them, but the big programs, 2-month programs. And I asked the question on myself. I looked at the curriculum and I said, the safety practitioners, do they talk about occupational hygiene? Now, that's going to be due diligence. Due diligence means you're going to sit down with the provider and pick his or her material apart. Pick their knowledge apart. How long have you been doing this? Are you any good? Do you have testimonials to say that you are better than the next? Because when we were talking about the old version of competency with SAQA-CETA NQF, it was really quite alarming. I spoke to somebody who was a trauma doctor. And he said to me, which is shocking, I used to dive with him. He was a scuba diver. I used to dive with him, and he said to me, do you know that he's not allowed to run General Safety Regulation 3 first aid programs? But he's a trauma doctor. Why? Because he doesn't have the badge from CETA. Now, that's crazy. That's insane. Yeah. So I wouldn't just rely on the fact that they are registered or accredited or certified or verified or any of those things. Yeah. Check them out. Interview them. It's not common that you go, oh, great, nice to meet you. Come and run a training program for our people. Yeah.
Correct, yeah.
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, look, I think it was more referring to health and safety representative. So just as a reminder that a health and safety representative must be elected. Okay, so that will generally be an employee that is already part of the company, you know, part of the processes. So, and I know that there is health and safety representative training courses out there. Just find the one that's right for you, that works for your employee or works in your situation. And it's never a bad thing to train your employees, to make them more competent and to make them understand what is their roles and functions as a health and safety representative. But it should actually, when nominating your employees, when they nominate a health and safety rep, it shouldn't incur a cost. That employee, it should be the person that is already showing signs of, you know, the person that enjoys health and safety, that wants to implement health and safety tasks or make a task safer within the company. It must be a person that's got that passion for it. And generally, employees knows who that person is, and generally that person will be elected. So, yeah, it shouldn't actually incur any costs. You should elect that employee that is willing to stand in that position over and above that person's normal roles and responsibilities. So I hope that answered the question as well.
100%. Can I just quickly go back to Anton Ferreira's questionnaire?
Sure.
And I love what you say there, Anton. It's obvious that you've read the legislation and you know that there's a definition amongst many others of employee and employer. And I think the question initially was, do we need to do assessments, small and large? But Anton, you're on the right track. I value that and I salute that. And to the team at SIOSH, talk about salute. Thank you very, very much. I trust it's been wonderful and everybody's really benefit from it. If you'd like to drop a comment, good, bad, or otherwise, I've got broad shoulders, ex-policeman, can handle that. Tell us what you think. Thanks very much. And from Ken and Penny and Natalie and everybody else, au revoir. Bye-bye now.
Thank
Thank
you. Thank you so much, Ken. Really appreciate it. We are obviously over time, so I would love to chat more with you. But thank you for your time. Thank you to Penny, Natalie as well for being in the back end of the webinar. It's not usual for me to be on the front end, so this is quite interesting for me. But yeah, I just want to thank our SIOSH members for attending. I think we were 270 attendees at peak. I hope you found it informative. The physical agents regulations is quite complicated. As Ken alluded to, we did a webinar with Dr. Greg Q and Garth Hunter, who is an occupational hygienist, in April. You can find that webinar on our YouTube channel, and it's also under our latest news tab on the SIOSH website. Yeah, thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate your time. Be safe, and we'll see you for the next webinar. Thank you.